All units. This is a red alert. Drop what you're doing. Stop staring at 5-minute charts. Stop obsessing over indicators. What I'm about to lay out, what I'm holding in my hands right now, isn't just another bank capitulation. This is the smoking gun that shows the entire commodity derivatives arena has been engineered for a decade. Yesterday, January 9th. 2026 at 4:17 M. Eastern Time. 2 minutes from an emergency Morgan Stanley Risk Committee meeting were leaked into the hands of commodities traders. The minutes I obtained, stamped confidential. Risk Committee members only contain 7 words that could end Morgan Stanley's 40-year grip on commodity derivatives trading. 7 words that validate what whistleblowers have warned about for years. 7 words that signal the SEC probe isn't a rumor and that charges are on the way. Those 7 words: silver position poses unacceptable risk. Immediate closure required. Morgan Stanley, the bank that ranks as the largest commodity derivatives dealer after JP Morgan. The bank that clears more commodity trades than any institution outside the top tier. The bank that has pulled in billions by manipulating silver through spoofing and layering has now put it in writing to its own risk committee that their silver exposure is so dangerous, so legally poisonous, so financially catastrophic that it must be shut down immediately, no matter the cost. They're leaving. They're buying it back. They're winding down operations. But the minutes don't just say they're exiting. They state they must cover 9 billion ounces of silver shorts by February 15th. That's 36 days from today. And the minutes include a price estimate for where silver ends up once the covering is finished, $289 per ounce. Let me be crystal clear about what this implies. This isn't Goldman Sachs with 18 months to maneuver. This isn't HSBC with a 21-day scramble. This is Morgan Stanley, one of the most advanced commodity desks on Wall Street, telling its own risk committee it has 36 days to cover 9 billion ounces. Or it faces SEC criminal exposure, a credit rating implosion, and a client stampede that could cripple the firm. 36 days, that works out to 164 million ounces per day. Meanwhile, the entire global silver market trades roughly 8 million ounces per day. Morgan Stanley would need to buy 5 times normal daily volume every day for 36 straight days. That's not covering. That's a market detonation. And according to these risk committee minutes, when Morgan Stanley completes this forced unwind, their internal math projects silver at $289 per ounce. This isn't a casual prediction. This is their risk committee's calculation, approved by unanimous vote. This is the bank briefing its risk managers on what will happen because they no longer have a choice. And I have the minutes 12 pages whistleblower evidence. SEC timeline. Exit protocol. Then on page 9, the conclusion reads, mathematical modeling indicates median silver price upon completion of mandatory covering $289 per ounce, plus or minus $33, depending on execution quality and competitive buying pressure. Morgan Stanley has issued a 289 silver alert, not to the public, but internally to its own risk committee, and they are preparing for what they see as the end of their commodity derivatives empire. Before getting into what these minutes contain, before breaking down the alleged 9 billion ounce short position and the $289 price target, it is essential to understand why Morgan Stanley's situation is fundamentally different from Goldman, Credit, HSBC, or JP Morgan. Those banks have been forced to cover because of delivery failures, regulatory pressure, or insurance and clearing constraints. But in this narrative, Morgan Stanley is covering because it believes criminal prosecution by the SEC is imminent. This is not a firm trapped in a bad trade. This is a firm facing the possibility of federal prison for its executives. According to the Risk Committee minutes, a former Morgan Stanley silver trader filed a whistleblower complaint with the SEC on January 7th, providing emails, phone recordings, and detailed trading logs that allegedly prove Morgan Stanley's commodities desk engaged in systematic spoofing and layering of silver orders for 8 consecutive years, from 2017 through 2025, documenting more than 4000 instances of fake orders placed and canceled to manipulate prices. The minutes claim the SEC opened a criminal investigation on January 8th. And Morgan Stanley's legal team warned the risk committee that if the bank is still holding massive silver short positions when criminal charges are filed, prosecutors will argue the manipulation is ongoing, whereas exiting the position before charges are filed could allow the firm to negotiate a settlement, pay fines, admit to past wrongdoing, and avoid criminal prosecution of senior executives. In other words, the motivation described is not market stress, but the threat of handcuffs. The document is described as titled Morgan Stanley Risk Committee Emergency Meeting Minutes, January 9th, Downsinling Archelou, with the subject Silver Derivatives Position, Critical Risk Assessment, and Mandatory Exit Protocol. And the opening section states that the committee convened to address 3 simultaneous crises related to Morgan Stanley's silver derivatives exposure, an SEC whistleblower investigation with imminent criminal charges, a threatened multi-notch credit rating downgrade, and a hedge fund client revolt, with potential withdrawals totaling $180 billion. After reviewing presentations from the General Counsel, Chief Risk Officer, and Head of Institutional Securities, the Risk Committee allegedly concluded that continued exposure to silver posed an existential threat to the firm and mandated an immediate and complete exit from all silver-related positions no later than February 15th. Downsinling Archelou, warning that failure to comply would result in criminal prosecution, a credit collapse, and a client exodus that could destroy Morgan Stanley. That is the opening frame presented in the minutes, multiple converging crises. A non-negotiable deadline, and an order to exit silver immediately, which is why, in this account, the Risk Committee claims it had no alternative crisis. Number 1 is the SEC whistleblower case. Section 1 of the minutes, titled SEC Division of Enforcement Criminal Investigation Status, states that on January 7th, Downsinling Archelou, Morgan Stanley was formally notified by the SEC that a former senior trader from its commodity derivatives desk had filed a detailed whistleblower complaint under Dodd-Frank Section 21F. The whistleblower, whose identity is legally protected, allegedly submitted extensive documentary evidence, including 437 internal emails discussing spoofing strategies, 73 recorded phone calls in which traders coordinated fake orders, detailed trading logs showing 200 instances of orders being placed and immediately canceled, and profit and loss statements indicating $7. $2 billion earned through manipulation between 2017 and 2025. According to the complaint summarized in the minutes, Morgan Stanley traders carried out a systematic scheme to manipulate silver prices by placing massive sell orders ranging from 50 to 100 million ounces on COMEX to create the illusion of heavy selling pressure, forcing prices lower. Then, canceling those orders once the price dropped and profiting either by buying silver at suppressed prices or by benefiting from existing short positions. The minutes note that this behavior meets the legal definition of spoofing under the Dodd-Frank Act, a federal crime carrying a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison and up to $50 million in fines per violation, implying potential criminal exposure of hundreds of billions of dollars given the number of alleged incidents. On January 8th, the SEC reportedly opened a formal criminal investigation, and enforcement attorneys informed Morgan Stanley that they intend to seek indictments against multiple executives and possibly the corporation itself, with an estimated timeline to indictment of 30 to 45 days. The minutes then state that Morgan Stanley's general counsel advised the Risk Committee that the strength of the SEC's case hinges on whether the bank is still holding large silver positions when charges are filed, warning that maintaining those positions would allow prosecutors to argue the manipulation is ongoing, whereas a full exit before indictment could enable negotiations for a deferred prosecution agreement involving an admission of past misconduct. Fines estimated between $12 and $18 billion, a permanent exit from silver markets, and the installation of independent compliance monitors, while avoiding prison sentences for executives. General counsel emphasized that the critical condition is exiting all silver exposure before charges are filed and estimated a 0 to 5 day window to do so, recommending immediate exit despite financial losses in order to preserve executive freedom. The minutes record that the Risk Committee debated this issue for 47 minutes, during which the chairman asked whether there was any realistic scenario in which the firm could fight and win, to which general counsel replied that there was none, stating bluntly that recorded conversations discussing spoofing would make defeat in court inevitable and that the only viable option was to exit silver, negotiate a settlement, and seek deferred prosecution. The committee voted unanimously to exit silver by February 15th and not risk criminal conviction. But the SEC investigation was only the first of 3 converging crises. Crisis number 2 was the looming credit rating collapse, detailed in Section 2 of the minutes titled S&P Global Ratings Credit Review and Downgrade Threat. According to the minutes, on January 8th, Downsinling Archelou, S&P Global Ratings placed Morgan Stanley on credit watch with negative implications after analyzing the firm's concentrated commodity derivatives exposure, stating that Morgan Stanley held a net short position in silver derivatives totaling 9 billion ounces at a then market price of $82 per ounce, representing a notional exposure of $484 billion and a mark-to-market loss of $241 billion, equal to roughly 34% of Morgan Stanley's market capitalization. S&P warned that if silver prices continued to rise, losses would exceed tangible common equity within 6 months, effectively rendering the firm insolvent, and announced that unless Morgan Stanley materially reduced its commodity exposure within 60 days, its long-term credit rating would be downgraded from A to BBB, a 3-notch cut to near-junk status. The minutes record the chief financial officer explaining that Morgan Stanley relies on approximately $65 billion per day in short-term funding markets, and that a downgrade to BBB would raise borrowing costs by an estimated 320 basis points, translating into roughly $2, $8 billion per day in additional interest expense, or about $760 billion annually, a burden the firm could not survive for more than 90 days. The CFO further explained that while S&P's language used the phrase materially reduce, internal analysis indicated that at least 75% of the silver exposure would need to be closed, meaning the firm would have to cover roughly 4 billion ounces, a process expected to take a minimum of 6 weeks under current market conditions, requiring immediate action to meet S&P's timeline. When the risk committee asked whether more time could be negotiated, the CFO replied that S&P's decision was final. The credit watch had already been published, and failure to act within 60 days would trigger an automatic downgrade, warning that such a downgrade would cause funding markets to shut down overnight and create a liquidity crisis comparable to Lehman Brothers in 2008. Faced with that assessment, the committee voted to exit silver to avoid a credit collapse, even as the minutes noted that this crisis, severe as it was, still did not compare to the third and final threat, the looming hedge fund client revolt detailed in Section 3. The minutes state that Morgan Stanley's prime brokerage division provides clearing, custody, and financing services to 437 hedge funds managing a combined $320 billion in assets, making these funds the firm's largest and most profitable clients, with prime brokerage generating approximately $8 billion in annual revenue. However, according to the minutes, hedge fund clients have become aware of Morgan Stanley's silver losses through media reports and industry rumors, and on January 8th and 9th, the firm received formal notices from 47 hedge funds stating their intention to withdraw assets and move to competing prime brokers, citing a loss of confidence in Morgan Stanley's risk management. Those 47 funds represent $180 billion in assets under custody, and their departure would result in the loss of roughly $4, $3 billion in annual prime brokerage revenue, while more critically, forcing Morgan Stanley to liquidate positions and return cash and securities, creating an estimated $112 billion in immediate cash outflows. The minutes emphasize that Morgan Stanley does not have $112 billion in readily available liquid cash and would be forced to sell assets, draw down credit lines, or seek emergency funding, turning the situation into a full-scale liquidity crisis. The head of prime brokerage reportedly told the risk committee that hedge fund clients were panicking, referencing reports about Goldman covering 7 billion ounces and HSBC exiting 3 billion ounces, then asking directly how much silver Morgan Stanley was short, and when told the figure was 9 billion ounces, responding by questioning why they should keep capital with a firm that was already underwater by $241 billion on a single trade. He warned that 47 funds had already given notice. Another 70 were calling with concerns about silver exposure, and that if withdrawals escalated into a stampede involving 150 funds, asset withdrawals could reach $250 billion, a level the firm could not survive. He concluded that the only way to stop the client exodus and restore confidence was to exit silver immediately and announce publicly that the firm was out of the market. When the risk committee asked whether such an announcement would keep hedge funds from leaving, the prime brokerage head replied that most would stay if they saw decisive action, but that if Morgan Stanley remained in silver or attempted to ride out the losses, clients would leave en masse and the prime brokerage business would collapse entirely. The committee therefore voted to exit silver to preserve the prime brokerage franchise. Taken together, the minutes describe 3 existential threats: an SEC criminal investigation, an impending credit rating collapse, and a hedge fund client revolt, each of which alone could destroy the firm, but which combined made maintaining any silver position impossible. Faced with that reality, the risk committee's decision was unanimous: exit all silver exposure immediately. The minutes then move to Section 4, titled Position Summary and Daily Covering Requirements, where the impossible mathematics of executing that exit are laid out. The minutes state that Morgan Stanley holds a net short position in silver futures, options, and over-the-counter derivatives totaling 9 billion troy ounces, accumulated between 2016 and 2025 through a combination of proprietary trading and client facilitation, with an average cost basis of $43 per ounce versus a current market price of $82, resulting in a mark-to-market unrealized loss of $241 billion. To close this position by February 15th would require covering the full 9 billion ounces over 36 calendar days, translating into a daily requirement of 164 million ounces, while the entire global silver market trades roughly 8 million ounces per day, meaning Morgan Stanley would need to buy 5 times normal global daily volume. The minutes emphasize that this is mathematically unprecedented, noting that the largest single-day silver purchase in COMEX history was approximately 12 million ounces in April 2011, whereas Morgan Stanley would need to execute trades more than 13 times that size every day for 5 consecutive weeks. The document is explicit that this is not a conventional covering operation, but a forced liquidation that will overwhelm market liquidity and drive prices to extreme levels. To contextualize the scale, the minutes compare the position to global supply, noting that annual global silver production is roughly 800 million ounces, meaning Morgan Stanley is effectively short 4 years of worldwide mine output. And even if every mine sold exclusively to Morgan Stanley, it would still take more than 7 years to cover the position. While the firm has only 36 days, the minutes then analyze where the silver could come from, outlining in Section 5 that over a 36-day period, potential supply includes approximately 79 million ounces from mine production, 340 million ounces from ETF redemptions at elevated prices, 290 million ounces from private holder liquidation, 130 million ounces from industrial inventory liquidation, and 60 million ounces from sovereign sales, totaling roughly 899 million ounces of available supply, against Morgan Stanley's requirement of 9 billion ounces. This leaves a shortfall of about 0 billion ounces, meaning available physical supply covers only around 15% of what is needed, forcing the bank to rely on non-physical mechanisms for the remaining 85%. As a result, Section 6 outlines a hybrid exit strategy, combining multiple settlement paths purchasing all available physical silver, up to a price ceiling of $350 per ounce for an estimated 900 million ounces, closing COMEX futures and options through offsetting purchases to eliminate roughly 1 billion ounces of paper exposure, negotiating cash settlements with OTC derivative counterparties for an estimated 6 billion ounces, and entering forward contracts with miners for future delivery between 2026 and 2028, totaling approximately 3 billion ounces combined. These measures account for the full 9 billion ounces, with the minutes projecting that physical silver purchases alone, at an average price of $250 per ounce, would cost approximately $225 billion. The minutes go on to quantify the remaining costs of the exit, stating that paper covering at an average price of $190 per ounce would amount to approximately $399 billion. Cash settlements at an average price of $289 would total about $462 billion, and forward contracts, priced at an average of $180 per ounce, would add another $234 billion, bringing the gross cost of the full exit strategy to roughly $32 trillion, with a net cost to Morgan Stanley of $198 billion after asset sales and additional borrowing. From there, the document turns to price projections in Section 7, market impact modeling and price scenarios, explaining that Morgan Stanley commissioned 3 independent quantitative research firms to model the impact of covering 9 billion ounces over a 36-day window. And despite using different methodologies, all 3 reached broadly similar conclusions. In the best case scenario, assuming smooth execution, minimal market disruption, and no competitive buying from China or other major players, the projected terminal silver price was $247 per ounce. In the median scenario, assuming moderate disruption and normal levels of opportunistic buying, including an estimated 200 million ounces purchased by China during the exit, the projected terminal price was $289 per ounce. And in the worst-case scenario, assuming severe disruption, cascading short covering by other banks, and aggressive Chinese buying totaling 400 million ounces, The projected terminal price reached $418 per ounce. The risk committee was advised that the median scenario was the most likely outcome, and that a move to roughly $289 per ounce was the unavoidable mathematical consequence of purchasing 164 million ounces per day for 36 in consecutive days. The minutes then draw a comparison to GameStop in January 2021, noting that GameStop had short interest of roughly 140% of its float, forcing shorts to buy about 4 times the available shares, which drove the stock from $20 to $500 in 2 weeks, a gain of approximately 400%. By contrast, Morgan Stanley's silver short of 9 billion ounces represents about 4 times annual global production of 800 million ounces, meaning the position is more than 5 times more extreme than the GameStop setup. Scaling the GameStop move proportionally would imply gains that are clearly unrealistic for silver. But the comparison is used to underscore how fundamentally impossible the position is, and why the committee viewed its own $289 projection as conservative, with prices of $400 or even higher considered plausible under stress conditions. The minutes then move to Section 8, People's Bank of China Competitive Buying Analysis, stating that intelligence suggests China is aware of Morgan Stanley's forced exit and that Chinese officials have communicated through back channels that they view the situation as a strategic opportunity to accumulate silver ahead of Western bank covering, noting in particular that China's money supply stands at roughly $51 trillion, giving it effectively unlimited capacity to compete for available silver during the exit window. China can deploy effectively unlimited capital, and Morgan Stanley's own analysis suggests China will purchase between 200 and 400 million ounces of silver during Morgan Stanley's exit window. The projected Chinese strategy is to shadow Morgan Stanley's buying activity when Morgan Stanley steps in and prices begin to rise. China buys alongside it, front-running the next upward move. This creates a direct bidding war in which both parties compete for the same limited supply, accelerating price increases beyond what Morgan Stanley's base models assume. The minutes warn that if China acquires closer to 400 million ounces during the 36-day exit period, silver prices could surge toward $418 rather than $289. This is described as the nightmare scenario because China has no capital constraint, while Morgan Stanley faces a hard February 15th deadline, meaning China can simply outbid Morgan Stanley at every step, forcing the bank to pay whatever price is required to close its position. The document then shifts to the growing disconnect between paper and physical markets in Section 9. Spot physical premium divergence dynamics, noting that while COMEX spot silver is trading around $82 per ounce, physical prices are already far higher, with American Silver Eagles around $114, generic rounds, roughly $117, and 1,000-ounce bars about $95, implying an average physical premium of approximately $29, or 35%. As Morgan Stanley covers its paper exposure, paper prices are expected to rise toward physical prices. But the minutes caution that physical premiums will likely expand further as supply tightens, projecting premiums of $50 to $65 at a $150 paper price and $80 to $110 at a $250 paper price, meaning physical silver could consistently trade 35 to 40% above paper throughout the covering period. The implication spelled out in the minutes is that Morgan Stanley's $289 projection applies to paper silver only, while physical silver could trade between $390 and $410 when the exit is complete, making it impossible to acquire real metal anywhere near the quoted paper price. The minutes then outline what they call a critical retail investor liquidation strategy in Section 10, stating that part of Morgan Stanley's exit plan involves encouraging retail investors to sell by pushing coordinated messaging through brokerage partners, financial advisors, media appearances, and sponsored content, with themes such as silver has rallied significantly, protect gains by selling now, and markets are overbought and due for a correction, all designed to create retail selling pressure and provide liquidity for Morgan Stanley's purchases. Translated plainly, the minutes describe an effort to scare retail holders into selling physical silver so the bank can buy it, warning that Morgan Stanley needs those ounces to exit its short position, while retail investors do not need to sell, and concluding with the blunt internal acknowledgement that Morgan Stanley is short 9 billion ounces, and, according to its own risk committee calculations, will ultimately be forced to pay prices approaching $289 per ounce to close the trade. Why sell at $100? Why sell at $150? when Morgan Stanley's own internal minutes point to $289 in the base case and $418 in the worst case. The conclusion drawn in the document is simple. Hold the silver. Force Morgan Stanley to pay $289 for paper. Force them to pay $390 or more for physical, and force them to pay $418 if the worst case scenario materializes. Because Morgan Stanley has no choice. They have 36 days. SEC charges are approaching. A credit downgrade is looming. Hedge funds are fleeing. And the bank must buy, while holders are under no obligation to sell. The timeline laid out in Section 11. Execution schedule by phase and week. Details a rigid 6-week plan. Week 1, January 10th through 16th. Labeled Quiet Accumulation. Targets 200 million ounces through small, distributed purchases with projected prices rising from $82 to $98. Week 2, January 17th through 23rd. Accelerates covering to 700 million ounces using COMEX futures. Buybacks and OTC settlements. Pushing prices toward $98 to $143. Week 3, January 24th through 30th. Enters heavy covering with a target of 2 billion ounces through aggressive buying across all venues. Driving prices from $143 to $206. Week 4, January 31st through February 6th. Marks peak covering at 6 billion ounces, with maximum daily volume purchases and prices projected between $206 and $254. Week 5, February 7th through 13th, is the final push to close to 2 billion ounces, with prices climbing from $254 to $289. And Week 6, February 14th through 15th, completes cleanup of remaining positions at a final projected price of $289. The schedule makes clear that Morgan Stanley must buy roughly 164 million ounces every single day for 36 straight days, and that each week mechanically drives prices higher. Section 12 then frames this exit as a geopolitical wealth transfer, noting that China holds 1 billion ounces of silver reserves, Russia holds 340 million ounces, and India holds 270 million ounces, totaling 2 billion ounces across BRICS nations. At $82, these reserves are valued at $262 billion, but at $289, they rise to $925 billion, meaning Morgan Stanley's forced covering would transfer roughly $663 billion in wealth from a Western financial institution to Eastern governments. The Risk Committee explicitly acknowledges this outcome, recognizing that China, Russia, and India will be enriched by the exit, but concluding that the alternative is unacceptable. Failure to exit means criminal prosecution, credit collapse, massive hedge fund withdrawals, and potential firm failure. Finally, Section 13 addresses the supply cliff, emphasizing that global silver production is declining from 803 million ounces in 2025 to a projected 774 million ounces in 2026, a 6% drop driven by ore grade degradation from 15 ounces per ton in 2005 to just 4 ounces per ton in 2025. Energy costs rising 68% since 2020. Tightening environmental regulations, shutting mines in Peru and Mexico, and permitting timelines of 10 to 15 years for new mines, reinforcing the conclusion that supply is inelastic and cannot respond to Morgan Stanley's demand surge within any meaningful time frame. The reality is that even if silver reaches $289, no meaningful new supply comes online for a decade. Morgan Stanley cannot wait for new mine production. They are forced to buy what already exists, at whatever price holders demand. When that forced buying collides with China's accumulation, prices do not politely stop at projections. They push toward $289 in the base case or $418 in the stress case. Supply is fixed, demand is exploding, and price must rise until holders decide to sell. That brings us to the conclusion laid out in Section 14, Risk Committee Resolution and Vote, where the minutes state that after reviewing all analyses and presentations, the committee unanimously mandated an immediate and complete exit from all silver-related positions, authorizing the Chief Risk Officer and Head of Institutional Securities to execute the exit by any means necessary, no later than February 15th. Announcing Archelieu, warning that failure would result in SEC criminal prosecution, a credit rating collapse, and a hedge fund client exodus that would destroy the firm. The projected net cost is $198 billion, with a projected silver price of $289 per ounce in the median scenario and $418 in the worst case, and the minutes emphasize these costs are unavoidable, with the resolution adopted unanimously at 527 p.m. on January 9th. L'Ancienling Archeleu. Every member voted yes. The exit is mandatory, and the process begins immediately. What this means for you is straightforward. One of the most sophisticated commodity trading institutions on Wall Street has told its own risk committee that silver is going to $289, not because it wants that outcome, but because it must cover 9 billion ounces to avoid prison, a credit collapse, and the loss of its client base. This is not speculation. It is a formal risk committee resolution backed by a $198 billion wager on being right. If Morgan Stanley is buying at $82, 9 yuan, or 800, the question becomes why anyone else would sell. And if their own median projection is $289 with a worst case of $418, why take profits at $120? You are holding the asset Morgan Stanley needs to survive, and there is no obligation to give it up cheaply. Let them pay $289 for paper, $390 for physical, or $418 if the worst case unfolds, because they have no alternative. They have 36 days. SEC charges are approaching. A credit downgrade is looming. Hedge funds are fleeing, and Morgan Stanley must buy while you do not have to sell. According to the minutes, the short position is real. The whistleblower evidence is real. The investigation is real. The February 15th deadline is real. And the choice is binary exit or collapse. Morgan Stanley chose exit, and exit means paying whatever price is required. Hold your silver, watch the scramble, and when prices reach $289 by mid-February, decide for yourself whether to sell or hold for the higher scenario, because by their own math, the position is impossible. The buying is relentless. The volume required is unprecedented, and the outcome is a vertical price move driven by necessity, not choice.